Hello, welcome to the January 9th, 2024 Club Cubase livestream. My name is Greg Undo, and I'm the host of the livestream. If you have not attended a livestream before, how it works is you could ask questions in the live chat field, or simply send questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. When asking questions, if you could specify which version of Cubase you're running, whether it's Cubase LE, AI, Elements, Artist, or Pro, or other Steinberg programs with their version numbers. Also, if you could indicate which operating system you're on, whether it's Mac or PC, and the version number. So if it's version 11, 12, or 13, that information would be helpful. My ability to answer all the questions in a real-time manner will soon be eclipsed as we get more and more questions asked. And as questions are asked, we'll go through them chronologically. So if you don't see an immediate response to your particular question, we will get to it so you don't have to ask the same question over and over again. So I'd appreciate that. That just makes it easier to navigate throughout the live stream. And again, we should have an index of all topics that are covered in today's live stream pinned to the top of the comments field. Later tonight, I'll take a quick dinner break after the live stream and then go back and do all of the index, and there'll be with timestamps so you can navigate quickly. If you wanted to search for topics that have been covered in previous live streams, you could go to cubaseindex.com, and we want to thank Jan from Stockholm, who's back from vacation. So we're glad that you could. I see that he's on already, so wonderful that you can make it back. We hope you had a wonderful vacation, but you could search for topics. I also have a PDF file of all topics that have been covered in previous live streams. I'm happy to share if you email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. We've covered over 30,000 different topics. We also want to give a special thanks to Agent K and Jazz Dude, who serve as moderators on the live stream. So they're not Steinberg employees. They really do this out of the goodness of their hearts. We also want to give special thanks for all of Jazz Dude's efforts with the Cubase Nation Discord, which is a wonderful resource of information for the Steinberg community. And once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America. I primarily focus on Steinberg products, and I'm the host today. I'm presenting from outside of Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. And if you are on the live stream or if you're watching it afterwards, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. All right, and with that, we will go ahead and begin. All right, so Barry Gilmore asks, choices, Mac Silicon running Sonoma, Cubase 12 Pro, 14 CPU, 30 GPU, 16 core, neural engine, 96 gigabytes of RAM, or 1640, 128 gigabytes of RAM. So where the RAM could, if you're doing a lot of orchestral work, like where you're streaming lots and lots of samples, that's where you could really benefit from RAM. I would say that if you're getting a new system, that I would always err on getting as much RAM as you could possibly afford. It may seem like a little more expensive now, but it could add a year to 18 months of extra life onto your computer with more memory. So, programs and operating systems are always going to, be able to utilize memory. So if you have the choice, I would max out, my personal system. For my studio, I run 128 gigs of RAM. I don't think I've really taxed it in any project that I've worked on personally, but I'm not doing, but I'm not a film composer as well. All right, so we see Paulie DC just wants a little more kick in his monitor. All right. And we see Tommy C on. We have Home Studio World from Jordan saying hi to everyone. Great to see you back. Tommy C wants everyone to punch the like button. So if you haven't, if you learn a new tip or trick, hit the like button and make sure that you're also subscribed to the channel. All right, we have Uno Memento from Finland. We see Matt Elston on from London. We see Nick from Essex in the UK. Tommy C's asking what's up with all the rain. So, yeah, we're having a lot of rain here. in Washington, D.C. area today. I guess it's better than getting a blizzard of a snowstorm. All right, we have Martin Holwegen from Germany. Thanks for joining us. We have Alexander Plasko from Connecticut. Okay, so we have a question from Home Studio World. It says, thanks, Greg. When adding, for example, compressor and send as a pre to audio using a group or effects, is there a difference between them in audio to compressor interaction process? Okay, so if we have a, just take a loop over. So heavily compressed. All right, so now when we want to take a, so, you know, if we want it, I think question is, you know, so send as a pre to audio group or effects. Okay, so a lot of times when we want to use a compressor, we could just come over here, and generally a lot of times it's going to be just using kind of the inserts. So if I wanted to take this and let's run it through our dynamics, let's say our black valve compressor that we have with Cubase 13. So let's just heavily squash this. Let's turn off the click. All right, so as we listen to that, so now we're taking this, and we do have a dry-wet ratio. So if we want to, yeah, so usually compressors will be kind of put on inserts. If we wanted to send it, use a send instead. What we could do is if we go to our sends, we could say, let's come over, we'll add an effects channel to send one. We will go back through our dynamics, say our black valve. So now as we come over here, we could send this signal, and probably we want to make sure that the dry wet is set all the way. And then we could send the signal by varying amounts into the compression. Now, for a lot of compressor plugins that kind of mimicked original sources, you know, there's no significant benefit other than other sources could be sent to that. Another method, which is kind of very similar, is if we just choose to add a bus or a group. So let's add a group channel. So I'm just going to add a group channel to this selected channel. Or I'll just add the group channel. So we'll make a stereo group, and on this group that this drum loop is now feeding, we could place as an insert we'll just come over to, again, the dynamics, and we'll get to the black valve. So now if we wanted to take multiple drums or multiple background vocals and send them to this, we could send it into the group as well. And if we wanted more of a parallel processing, so where we could balance the compressed versus not compressed, here I could have it totally compressed, and here I could kind of blend. Once we adjust the dry wet ratio, we could blend that for more kind of parallel processing, where we could have a balance between the processed and non-processed audio. So let me know if that makes sense for you. right, so we have Fabrizio, I think, just sending greetings from Paris. We have Arif B, just saying hi to everyone. All right, we have Nana Bafogia saying hi. We have Polly DC's looking forward to the live stream from Arizona. Glad you could make it today. Always great to see Robbie Bowling from Dallas, Texas. Thanks for joining us this afternoon from Texas. All right. Sorry, my chat field jumped. All right. All right, and we have Max Moses checking in from Nigeria. And we have Stefan from Sweden, John Costigan from Kenosha, Wisconsin. Zephaniah asks, is it possible to quantize a vocal track using Artist 10 on PC? All right, so let's say if I have, I'll just go to project with some vocals in it. So I think you could do this in Artist as well, but I'll show you, and you can see if the functionality is in Artist 10. I believe it is. All right, so say we'll just come in.
What did you say? You wished it.
All right, so if we open up our Quantize panel, I'm going to come over here. Let's open up our Quantize panel. And then we want to make sure that audio warp is on. And I'll say let's quantize this to 1/8 notes. So now that we have that on, we can see that the vocals have just shifted in time. So let's undo that. So now what we can do is, again, just come over, we can do audio warp quantize, and you could quantize your vocals just like that. So open up the Quantize panel. You could do it from the project window icon here, or go to edit, and we'll see your Quantize panel. Make sure that you have the audio warp on, and then just hit quantize. You can set your quantize amount. I'm pretty sure Artist has that, but I generally only run the pro version myself. And great to have you on, Zephaniah. All right, so we see from Martin asks, and we also see Benny from Sweden. Thanks for being on. Says, Greg, since Padshop 2 comes with Cubase as a VST plugin, is there a standalone version available? And if so, how to upgrade and run Padshop 2 as a standalone? So you could always purchase Padshop separately. It's also available if you have the, if you have like the Absolute collection. But let me see. I mean, you could sometimes, like, Groove Agent can be run standalone. Let's come over to Applications. So here I could run Groove Agent SE. So let's see if Padshop, I may not have it installed, but yeah, so I believe, I'm not sure if so you should be able to run it standalone if it's, let me just take a look. I'm not sure, I'll look in the Steinberg download. And see if I install it separately. I may just have the version that's installed with Cubase. Alright, so let's go to Padshop 2 here. I'll just install it and we'll see if it shows up as a standalone application. And I do have a license for Absolute on, so maybe running under that, but we'll see. Okay, so see if it shows up as a standalone application. So it might just work as a VST plugin, or just a plugin in general. So it might only work as some of the instruments, but it might work only as a plugin. If you want to email me, I could verify on my other system as well, and but you could email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, but it looks like it might be only a plugin, Martin, but I'll go ahead and confirm that if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. Okay, so we see from Eric B just says, hi Greg, using Cubase 13, the latest version, what is the best way to master your track? What to use in the inserts? So what a lot of people will use, and every song is going to present kind of different opportunities because each song will be different as it's approached. So sometimes always thinking of it as, throw these 3 plugins in and that will solve the problem on every project. May not be the best solution, but if I had to kind of pick some plugins, let's say if I came here, so here I have a little magneto, I would maybe do a little bit of frequency EQ.
You wished it all away, and I'm left here for 1,000 years and a day.
I always like doing, and here you have kind of dynamic EQs, so if you wanted to compress particular frequencies.
I'm on the outside looking in. You put the close side up on your heart. All the lights went out and it got dark. Where do I go from here?
So say now I want to come over and let's do maybe make it a little wider sounding. I'll go to like maybe an imager plugin. Make the highs maybe a little wider and keep the lows. And let's get to maybe your dynamics. And if you want to put like a limiter, and sometimes you can put like the limiters on post fader. So you say that's where we were before, and now with a couple of plugins. So, generally like for the final output stage, I would put maybe a touch of EQ, so maybe a limiter, maybe a little compression, maybe just a little imager to kind of widen out particular frequencies and kind of adjust as needed for the particular song. All right, Pauly DC asks, running Cubase 13 Pro and Windows 11 Pro, does Cubase need to be run as administrator? So I think most people will choose to run as administrator. I think that running as administrator versus not may have some effect on some drag and drop possibilities, like if you're from your Windows Explorer. So if you can't drag and drop from Explorer into Cubase, try toggling the administrator status. He says that's essential with Adobe products. Wondered about Cubase, Darko, Wavelab, and Spectral Layer. So I'm generally running everything, but I don't think it's so critical. I think it's, again, critical when dragging and dropping from outside of Cubase into the project. But if you do it from within Media Bay, I don't think you have any issues. All right, so we have Corey Levine just sending greetings from Nashville. Thanks for joining us. And Razel Zamini from Denmark. All right, and we have Robbie from Croatia and John Barry from the English Riviera. And Michael Marshall, great to see you on from Somerset in the UK. All right, so Benny asks, question, possible to export several MIDI tracks at once? Looked around but can't find how to do it. Cubase 13 Pro. All right, so let's go ahead and let's say we have some MIDI tracks here. So if you want to export them as audio, so let's say if I want to take this track, and this track, which are 3 separate MIDI tracks. If we go to render in place, we can say, okay, I just want to come and we'll render. And now it's going to take each of the particular tracks and render it as audio. And I'll show you rendering as MIDI as well, just in case you wanted to do that. And I may just, let's say when you go to render in place, let's say I'll just do these two. I think I may have had an option set. So let's get to, so that way I think I chose to render in place and we mix down to one file, but I'll now just take the 2 separate files. So we're going to take this track and this track. And we can see that we've rendered the audio for the MIDI tracks. So we see the first one done, and now the second one is done. So, and it's placed it directly underneath the particular tracks. If it's for, like, you know, exporting MIDI data, if we come over and solo the particular tracks, we can now export MIDI file. And we'll call this Jan 9th, 2024. We'll put it on the desktop for now. And now we will import that same MIDI file that we exported. And should be only those 2 particular tracks and not the other tracks, because we chose to export those while they were soloed. So now those particular tracks are, only those particular MIDI tracks are exported as MIDI data, or if you wanted to export it as audio, you can do multiple events simultaneously as using the render in place functionality. So let me know if that makes sense, Benny. All right, and we have great to see Robert Higgins from Morro Bay, California. All right, so we see a question from Robert Higgins. I have an old recording of a vocalist singing a cappella. Just importing in Cubase, I want to convert it to music notation. How? Okay, so really all you have to do is kind of come over here. We'll double click. Let's go into our VariAudio editor, and you may have to kind of tweak around. So we'll see that we're going to have, our VariAudio edits here. So I'll just kind of okay, we're going to do our analysis of the VariAudio, and you may have to kind of adjust some of the segments. So say we'll listen.
What did you say?
And just kind of come over and sometimes kind of join segments together. And let's say, okay, I want to do this. And, you could have one version that's kind of more in line for transcriptions. And then you'll see under here channel functions within the VariAudio tab. And at this point, we could say extract MIDI. And once we've done that, we've now taking the vocal file, it'll add it as MIDI data. And at this point, you could look at that in notation as well. You could clean up notation depending on the performance, but that's how you do it. So go into VariAudio for the vocal file. And again, once you have this, you'll see from the functions, extract MIDI. And then that will turn the vocal into MIDI so that you could have a transcription from the vocal recording. All right, so Fabrio just says, hi Greg, and thanks for all these great sessions. Best wishes for 2024. Thank you very much. Glad that you could be on. All right, so John Costigan just says, hello, Nick. I'm trying to download Absolute 6, and I get a prompt in a download assistant that actually says Absolute 6, but the individual instruments, example, grand and content, showed up individually. So, yeah, that's, because the grand is, I think Absolute is, several hundred gigabytes of content. So that's pretty normal. We actually created kind of the whole Steinberg download assistant because the content that was coming with the Absolute was so large that we couldn't do it other ways. So we just kind of wanted to simplify the process. So once we open up our download assistant here, you could just see when we go to Absolute 6, you'll probably see it under your My Products. We will just come over here and you could choose to install all, and that will install all the components of Absolute 6 that you get with it. Or you could do it one by one if you wanted to, but that's kind of how it works. It's kind of broken down into the individual instruments so that you can pick and choose which instruments you want installed if you already have some and stuff like that. And congratulations on winning your trivia question to get your Absolute 6 license. And that was, I think, right before Christmas. All right, so Mickey's Productions asks, hey Greg, do you know how I could freeze a bus track with the plugins on there? Also, do you know how I could freeze an effect track the same if the plugins are using too much DSP? All right, so let's say on this I have on my vocals, I'll have.
What did you say? You wished it all away.
All right, so if I wanted to freeze, because the effects channels and the buses don't have any actual data, what we could do is just come over and say we want to do our export audio mix down. And so let's say on this we're going through the Revelation reverb. So I'm going to select my group or my reverb return, and when it says after export, let's come here and we want to choose create audio track. All right, and then we could just call this, vocal reverb, the name of the file. So we'll say export audio. So I just have selected only the vocal reverb here, and we export audio. So if this reverb is taking too much system resources, this way we can now export, and this would just be, if we soloed only this particular track, if I get it seen. So once again, just come over to your export audio mixdown, and if you wanted to do like your groups and your vocal returns, you could just come right over here and do multiple at once. If you just click on the multiple tab, and you could render all of your reverbs, and all of your effects and your groups independently. And the key is, again, to get it imported into the project. We'll say, let's go to export audio mixdown. After export, we want to create audio track, and then that's going to automatically put it directly in the project window for you. So let me know if that makes sense. All right, so Fabrizio asks a question: running Cubase 13 Pro Mac Ventura, when converting CC data from key editor to main editor, is there a way to have the data follow shared copies, i.e. edit the main values cascade? All right, so let's just let me just write in some CC data that is pretty obvious for us to hear. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and write in some expression, and I'll just merge it in. Sorry about that. Let me just. Okay. So I'm just writing in dynamics here. Okay, so now we have our MIDI CC of our expression. All right, so let's say we want so converting CC data in the key editor to the main editor. So let's say we will come over to our CC automation setup, and let's say we want this on automation track. Okay, so let me just all right, so say if I'm writing, I'll automate the track here. So now we have, let's say, our automation here, our CC11 is now set to automation. All right, so let's say when we come here, we will Here, let me just write the automation one more time. Sorry about that. Okay, so we have the automation here. All right, so I think that now that if the question, if I'm understanding right, let me just. Okay, so we have our automation here. So you see, it's like when it's a shared copy. And let me just reread. So CC data, is there a way to have the data follow shared copies? Okay, so now that I have this, I'm going to not do that. So let's go ahead and make shared copies here. And we look, so there is a, if you go to the edit menu, make sure you have edit follows automation. So let's say now if I select some of the automation and move it there, looks like maybe the automation isn't updated for the shared event. So it doesn't look like that automation for is updated for the shared MIDI event. So let me know if that's kind of what you're talking about. I could pass that along to see. I know often if it is, let's say if I come over here and I have CC data in the events, that is now automatically kind of copied over. So but let me know if that's kind of what you want to do, or if you wanted the automation to automatically be shared. And if so, you might have to, as you make an adjustment here, just use the duplicate function. But then if we make a change here, that may not change. So, but yeah, it doesn't look like, if it's automation data, that, you know, it's the events within the particular, all the data within the particular events, but maybe not external data that gets applied. So let me know if that makes sense, if I'm understanding okay. All right, so Shantanu Dev asks, greetings from India. I'm using Cubase 13 LE. When I hit control panel, I don't see any pop-up window to adjust the latency. Am I doing some basic mistake or something else? I'm using Windows 11. So it could really depend. So if you come over here, we say, let's go to, it could really matter on your particular audio interface. So if we go to our studio setup, we select our audio system, you go to control panel. So some audio interfaces won't allow you to adjust. If you're using kind of the built-in audio interface, you may not see the control panel pop up. Some third-party audio interfaces, I think Mode 2 comes to mind, where you have to adjust the latency inside of their little applet or little control panel. So the vast majority, probably 99% of interfaces, you click on control panel and that will pop up, but not every interface will work that way. So if you could let us know which particular audio interface you're using, then that might be helpful as well. All right, so Andy Racks the Cams, just asking how I'm doing. So I'm doing great. Looking forward to live stream today. All right, so we have Milosh Stoshik just saying hello, Greg. So thanks for being on the live stream. Always wonderful to see Sable Winters, and she was like number 33. Thanks for being on, Sable. It's always better when you're on. All right. All right, so we see Jazz Dude just mentioned it. Sample Fuel has added some more free stuff, so yeah, check that out. And with Sample Fuel stuff, I think that's Danny Lux's company. You can know that that's used in real world, like TV production. He's probably the most prolific TV composer around. See Jazz Dude just saying that Padshop 2 is run as a VST, as a plugin, not as standalone. So, all right. So we see from Home Studio World just clarification. It says, sorry, great question. If it makes any difference if parallel compression on audio using group or effects channel. So it really, there's no real difference. It's just the same method whether you're using group or effects channel. So sorry for misunderstanding. All right, so we see, hello, Greg from Sword in Sweden. Doesn't acoustic feedback of VariAudio work if you switch from control room monitor to phones? We'll give it a shot here. Just jump back. Okay, so I'm going to, let's say right now when we go into VariAudio, and I have the acoustic feedback turned on. All right, so I'm going to switch. All right, make sure I'm understanding this. Doesn't acoustic feedback of VariAudio work if you switch from control room monitor to phones? All right, so I'm going to go into my panels here, and it could be tied to a preference. So I'm going to switch in my control room, my phones. I'm going to switch these to my outputs here instead of my control room. So I'll set my control room to different outs that aren't really connected anywhere where you guys could hear. All right, so now when we go to move, I may not hear the changes until this preference is activated. So if we go to preferences to control room, and if we choose to use phones channel as preview channel, at that point I can apply, we'll hit OK. So now I think that should hear it, but make sure my phone's channel volume is up. And let me just it seems like I should, let me just make sure the preference took. Here, let me turn it on. It seems like we should.
What did you say?
Make sure this is on now. Yeah, so it's working, going through the phone channel, but just make sure that again you have this particular preference activated, and then that should work. And then make sure that your phone's channel is up here. So let me just change my audio connections back. And now that we're back, we should have our preview going through the main control room. So yeah, it seems like it's working for me, Soren. But make sure that you have that preference turned on. Always great to see Gerald Ely from Martinez, California. All right, so you see Home of Creation ask, hi, sorry for dropping late. No worries at all. We have several hours left. The channel racks seem to be missing in the setup window in the mixer, my Cubase Pro 13. All right, so let's say if I go to, so one is, if you go to, let's say the setup. All right, so if we just go to like your setup toolbar, all right, let me just, all right, so within the racks themselves, and this kind of changed where, you know, there's like, you know, a lot of Windows had 6 or 7 different setup windows. So, but if you right click, you could see setup sections, and here you could pick and choose which racks are available in Cubase 13. So again, just right click on a rack and go to setup sections, and then you could see which particular racks are available, and you could disable, enable. All right, so we see from Secret Studios, Jay asks, is it possible to assign a control surface to groups buses, especially if using 2 different types of Mackie protocol, Behringer for general channels and Mackie for other groups? So, you know, if you, I don't think it's, I don't have a Mackie control device, but let's say if I had, just jump over here, and I'm going to add a number of group channels. So it's pretty easy, kind of just using, you know, the MIDI remote. So let's say I want one just as, you know, my particular channels here. So I'll go to my MIDI remote, and we will set up, I'll switch this over to mixer, so I could control my mixer just using this fader box. But let's say I have another fader box, and we'll say that's kind of functioning as expected from, you know, like a Mackie control for your channels. And I have another MIDI remote, and I just want to drive group channels. So I'll just add number of group channels here. Okay, so if I want just, so we'll go to the MIDI remote. I'm going to go to, all right, I'll just add my choice OS controller. Let's see if I still have mine in here. All right, so I'm going to activate this controller script. Okay, so right now I have a fader that just has make sure I still have this. I'll just rebuild it quickly here. All right, so we'll come over here. Let's just build a script. So we'll add a vendor called Troy. All right, let me see if I could reset the device because the MIDI port's not showing up. All right, I'm just going to do it with all right, I'll just show it on. So if I wanted the other control surface, let me have it. This may be it here. Let's see. Anyway, so I'll just show it on. So if I wanted another control surface, I'll just make a new mapping page here. But what we could do is we'll just go to a new mapping page. So imagine this is your secondary controller. And we have it built here. So I'm just going to move this knob. So I will come over to select a channel, right click, pick for MIDI remote mapping, assign. Let's go to channel 2, move the fader, pick up for MIDI remote mapping, apply, channel 3, etc. So now I could just have this controller that's just dedicated to the group volumes. So again, all you'd have to do is just move the fader that you want. Once you have the remote kind of defined, right click on this and apply the mapping, and now those 3 faders that I move up and down here are just controlling the volume of the particular controls. And you could have the other device for your dedicated for channels function as a normal Mackie control, and this one just transmitting 8 faders that is just dedicated to particular volume control. So if I now switch, we go to, let's say, our mixer, and now when I get to my mix console and we scroll over, we'll see the first 4 tracks here. As I move my fingers up and down, I go to the MIDI remote, and let's set this to our untitled page 2. So this is the first 3 are set up for my groups, and now we could just control the groups with the secondary MIDI control script or the MIDI device. So, but you probably want to run one is a MIDI remote and one is Mackie control. All right, always great to see Dallas LaRue from Las Vegas. All right, so we see from Stefan Glass, just says it's written in German, I believe. So maybe if it's possible to translate to English, or maybe someone else is able to translate for me, that'd be great. All right, so we have Ant O just saying greetings to everyone. See, Soren just says he quit the manual labor to get vocal text from product with voice samples and went to spectral layer and used automatic text. All right, Braxel asks, Greg, how do I get rid of these graphic glitches in my Cubase 13? It shows an icon with arrows going in a circle and another icon with a mic. Please advise. They repeat all over right on my screen. So there are some graphics things depending upon your driver that Steinberg has suggested doing. So you may want to refer to that. I think that there's some documentation that came with the 13.02 update. I know Steinberg is still exploring solutions. But if you want to share a screenshot with me, you could send it to clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, Mark Rabin says, question, I would like to use 2 interfaces, one SSL 2 Plus and one Zoom H6. Is there a way to do this without the ASIO for all driver? Using the drivers for each unit, Stella really wants to know. So everyone will give a big woof to Stella. But basically the problem is, you could use one driver those at a time, but if you use 2 drivers, realize that their clocks aren't synchronized. So it's almost like, hitting record on 2 different tape machines at the same time. And realize that those 2 machines aren't ever going to be synced because the SSL 2 Plus doesn't have like a clock output. And I don't think that the Zoom H6 does either. So if you wanted to use all of them together, if you want to use both interfaces together, and realize that this will probably result in recordings that are going to be out of sync. And if I know you kind of have worked in studios for a long time, Mark, but think of it like 2 tape machines that you just hit play and record on that aren't synchronized in any way. And that's kind of what you have with using 2 interfaces at once. So generally people would try to get an interface that has enough inputs and outputs to do all of their tracking and outboard needs and monitoring. So all the connections you need in a single interface. Some interfaces, with depending upon the driver protocol, if you have like a Dante system, Dante unifies the clock of all devices, and that's kind of passes audio over Ethernet network connections. But within the driver architecture itself, it's handling and unifying all the clocking between the different interfaces. All right, so we see from Braxel, just says, excuse me, Greg, how do you set up a print track in your session in Cubase 13 Pro? So a lot of times I don't set up necessarily print tracks, but if I had something, let's say, I'll just take this example. Let's just say I'll revert this project. So what some people will do if you wanted a print track is to send everything to kind of like a pre-master group. So let's say I want to take this, I'm going to take all of my tracks, and we could do this a couple of different ways. One is just to say, I will come over, let me hide my input channels, and let's go to our direct routing. So I want to add a group channel. Okay, and we'll just call this pre-master. All right, so now all tracks. So I'm going to take all of my tracks here, and we could go through like our direct output, and I'll just say it's going to put these into QLink. And now I could send all these to my pre-master group. All right, so if I wanted to now add an audio track, and I'm going to set that group, my pre-master group, as the audio input. I could now just come over here, and as I would hit record, all of the tracks here are now being recorded directly as a print track. We call this capture. So now if we want to listen to this one particular track, it's everything. So you could select everything, send it to a group. You could use direct outputs, and that way you could always have the group kind of set that. So now all the tracks are routed to the pre-master group. The output of the pre-master group is then sent as the audio input for another device, and then you could just hit record for another track and hit record in that track, and everything is kind of captured as your print track. So let me know if that makes sense. Okay, so we see from Ed Pacheco, hi Greg, when you're on a track and you click on show lanes, is there a way to have different volume? All right, so when you have lanes, the lanes are going to be kind of subset events on a particular track. The track itself has volume, but if you wanted to adjust the volume, I think you could use like clip gain. So let's say if we come here, so let's say I have a number of lanes here. So, because the track itself has volume, and these are all events that are in this particular track. So if you wanted to adjust the gain of different tracks, you could do that by just using the clip volume here, but the volume fader itself is going to be set up, so that, the volume is controlling the fader, because that's what the track is tied to, as opposed to these aren't on separate events. If you wanted them on separate tracks, what you could do is select all the lanes, right click, and choose to create tracks from lanes. And now all of those will show up as tracks that you could easily just say, okay, I want to take this one and adjust the volume down if necessary. But we could think of, again, as lanes as kind of a subset of information on a track, and the track itself has volumes, but you could take each of the events here and adjust, just the particular range. So even if we come here and let's say we did a comp and I like this, I could say, okay, this one just needs to be louder, this one needs to be softer. We could do it with clip gain volume. All right, always wonderful to see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas. Glad you can make it today. John Costigan says, Greg, thanks so much for all your service. It's a dream come true. Just happy to help people. It's always wonderful to see you on, John. So we have Jay Ehlers says, hi from Luxembourg. Quick question. Is there a major difference between render and mix down? So often they will kind of get you to the same area with rendering in place. Rendering isn't necessarily tied to the left and right locators. But could be tied to the selection. So if we are here, mix down is always going to be kind of tied to left and right locators. So if I have, let's say, my locator set on my particular song here, we'll activate this project. Okay, so when I render, we could make equal length audio file, or when I export audio mix down, this will kind of make the length of the event will be based on the left and right locators. And sometimes you may want to, if you're passing it on to someone else who's not smart enough to be running Cubase or Nuendo, and they need to open up a multi-track, if you make every audio file the same equal length, it's harder for them to mess up. But realize that you may have kind of empty space. So if you say, okay, I want to render this, you may have just silence here, and that silence could take just as much disk space as, audio that is sounding something, a particular event. So if we want to have equal length audio files, exporting works great. And when we go to export, we're going to have the choice of different effects options. So we could choose, whether you want the inserts and channel strip, or you want it to be dry, to include the groups and sends, or the master effects. So you could do that. Now, when you're doing an export from the export audio mixdown, you have the option to, so when we do your audio export here, so we could now come over and say we're going to do our export audio mixdown. We don't really, when we choose to create audio tracks or create a new project, what's going to happen is they will all get added at the very bottom. When we do a render in place, the render in place can be set up for the length of a particular event. So we could render the track, we could render the event depending upon what is selected. And we go to the render settings. So if we choose, just like we showed earlier, if I wanted to take these multiple tracks, when we render, they would just show up directly underneath the particular events that were rendered. So we could choose to get rid of them. We could keep the source files. We could mute the source files. We could give it particular names if we wanted to. So render in place is often maybe probably a better solution for freeing up system resources and memory for like heavy plugins or heavy VST instruments. And I would maybe use the export audio mixdown if I had to pass it on to someone else who's maybe using a different program, and you want to make kind of equal length audio files of each of the particular tracks, like stems, and pass that along to someone else. But if you do an export audio, if you do a render in place, the lengths of the particular events will be preserved for you, so someone could import a bunch of files and not have it necessarily all on the same tracks as expected. So I would render in place to free up resources inside of your Cubase project, and export audio to deliver the final files to a record label, the film company, or for passing it on to other people using other programs if they're not smart enough to be running Cubase. see, Mark Rabin's going to have minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit this weekend. And he wants burgers instead of ice cream from Michael Teams. Good luck with the cold weather, Mark. All right. All right, so we have a question. Is there a way to warp MIDI events in the key editor? All right, so let's say, generally when we are working with, let's go ahead and look at our key editor here. So, generally MIDI stuff is always pretty easy to work with, but, if we have to the point where you want to, let's say I'll show it on, so there's a couple ways to do kind of warping in the editor. So one is just to kind of do like a warp grid. So like say, this is where, let me just turn on my tempo track here quick. All right, so if we are in the MIDI editor and we say, okay, we want, measure 51 to be set up, and I'll just get to my tempo warp, and this is where add a tempo track here quickly. Okay. All right, so now we could move the measures to just kind of say this is where measure 81 goes, this is where measure 82 is, 83 is here. This is, so we could move the bars to match the MIDI, but you don't necessarily, one of the things you could also do is just kind of come over here, and whereas audio, it's a little trickier, here we can say, oh, I just need these MIDI events here to be earlier in time. This is in essence kind of what warping is just kind of, we have a lot more flexibility for MIDI to move these particular events in time. So I could just say, okay, I need to move these events here. So we could just say, and I'll just switch my, so we could move events kind of freely anywhere that we want. So that's why kind of warping is kind of inherent within the natural MIDI editing, I think. But if you wanted to do kind of, time warping, for like a MIDI performance, you could just come here and move the bar lines to kind of match the MIDI performance, or again just take the MIDI performance and move the events around kind of as you see fit freely whenever you need to. All right. All right, so we see from Matt Elder, says, I'm having trouble with VST Connect. When the performer records into my DAW, it is a second off. When playing back, I thought it was supposed to compensate. Please help. So if you're doing that, yeah, so it is supposed to compensate. So it should do that automatically. So let's come over to our VST Connect SE. I don't have another machine set up, but let me see if I could just launch VST Connect Performer here. Okay, so all right, let me just. All right, so this is my Cubase side, and let's come over here. I think that we could just just see if I could get this going on. All right, so one of the things that it might be, let's just see if I get this. So check here to make sure that you're not in rehearsal mode. So that could kind of throw off some of the different aspects of what you're talking about. So I would make sure that rehearsal mode isn't turned off. And as you're recording, so let's say if we come and create a VST Connect, make sure that you don't have the monitor enabled, because the VST Connect will automatically do that. But make sure you don't have the rehearsal mode on under the talkback control here, and that I think will take care of it for you, but it does compensate for it. Sorry, I don't have it set up to don't have my other computer set up. All right, wonderful to see Peter checking in from Montreal. Thanks for joining us. Hope you're doing well. All right. My chat field just jumped. All right, so I think I'm back. All right. All right, so we see from Chernobyl Audio, it says, is there any resource for your paid that goes deeply into how to program macros and to use the Project Logical Editor and Logical Editor? It's a mystery to me. So I don't know of any. I mean, we've obviously covered it a lot on live streams, but, you know, we could think of, you know, show you like an example of how to use the macros and Project Logical Editor. So one of the questions we had last live stream, someone wanted to know how to select every other event in a particular project. So, so if we have like hundreds of different events on a track, so I'll just get rid of this. So what we want to do is select every other track. So a macro is really just a series of key commands. So if you find yourself doing the same functions over and over again, what you could do is make a macro, and that macro would just execute. So we go to our key commands here. We can choose to, so instead of repeatedly doing the same task over and over and over and over and over again, we could create a macro to do this. So if I select this particular event, and I'll just kind of resize the window here, what I want to do is to take every other event here, and what I want to do is to mute every other event. So I'm just going to come here and run the macro. So now every other event is muted. So in this case, what we want to do is, and I wanted to take, we'll go to our project logical editor, and we could think of the project logical editor as being a particular conditions. So what do we want to do? Do we want to delete? Do we want to change? Do we want to select or deselect something? And we have kind of our target filters here where we could see what we want to do something to, and we can think of our event transform actions as what we want to do with these particular events. Now we could have pre and post commands. So in this case, what I want to do is to select all events that are, I want to select all events that are muted. And what I want to do is to unmute the events and then invert the selection. So these are just like key commands, functions, separate program. So I could set up commands to go before and after. And if you want to, I could just, now when I hit apply, every other event is now selected. So first I made every other event muted, and then just by utilizing this macro, so we could run that macro multiple times, and then I could take every one of those muted events, selected, unmuted, and then invert the selection so that at this point every other event is selected. So we could kind of set up conditions, and these are kind of Boolean in nature. I know sometimes when we get into the logical editors, you know, from talking to people on our Zoom social meetups, that like their brain just immediately tunes out. But just kind of think of it as kind of a very logical function. So I want to take, you know, selected events, and let's say I want to, you know, what do I want to do to these selected events, you know, or I want to change these particular events. So that's kind of just a quick overview, and you know, and this will show again how to select every other event, and this is kind of using a combination of macros as a series of keyboard shortcuts that are executed as a single event, and a project logical editor. We could think of this as I want to change the color of every one of these events. You know, so if I just came over here, I could say let's take the selected events, and I want to transform the selected events, and I want to set the color to a fixed value, so every selected event is kind of this violet color. So now I could just say boom, and you know, so we could do stuff like that. So we could set up different conditions. A lot of times, and you know, we have a MIDI logical editor. The MIDI logical editor is going to be set for creating stuff in MIDI. So I want to take every other hi-hat and increase or decrease the velocity of it. So we could do that for MIDI. So a lot of times, you know, I found it the practical way of kind of learning it is, okay, I think I should be able to do it and kind of work out what conditions, you know, what do you want to affect and how do you want to affect it? How do you want to change it? And that's a good basis. And there's lots of presets that are available as well. But you could always reach out to Club Cubase at steinberg.de if you want it. You know, I can't figure out how to do this in a logical editor or a project logical editor, or I need a macro to do this. You know, let us know what you want to accomplish, and then we could show you kind of the logic of how to approach it with solving it with a macro or logical project logical editor preset. But if you do a search on all of the, go to cubaseindex.com or look through the searchable PDF, there's lots of examples of kind of project logical editor presets that we've done in the live streams. So I hope that's helpful. All right, so we have Blackbird Officials ask, hi Greg, how can I make a group track from selected tracks just from the project view without going into the mixer view? Okay. All right, so let's say I want to take all of my drums in this project and send them to a group channel without going into the mixer. Okay, so let's say I have my MIDI remote active here. So I'm going to select all the channels that I want, and I can just select the top channel, hold down the shift key, select the bottom. And what we want to do now is right click, and we'll see add track, and we'll say group channel to selected channels. So we'll make this a stereo group, and let's say, okay, let's call this drums. And now all of my tracks are routed to my drum bus, my drum groups, and all the tracks are just going right here to the drum bus. So select the tracks, right click, add track, group channels to selected channels. Let me know if that's helpful for you, Blackbird. All right, wonderful to see Daniela Tocan on. All right. All right, so we see, I think it's from Vincent. It says, I wonder if you got time to review my email today with the MIDI remote question. So I think I got it. So I'll be doing those kind of towards the end, but if you wanted to just ask in the chat field again, I'd be happy to go through it before then. All right, so we see, hey Greg, what is the fastest and quickest way to record audio to an audio track from a MIDI track using an instrument? So I assume it's a MIDI track, maybe, the quickest and fastest way. All right, so let's say I'll just do a brand new project. So, all right, I want to come over here. Let's add an instrument track. So let's say, okay, let's do Retrolog. All right, so I have that in Cubase 13. All we have to do is add an audio track. Its input, we want to set it to the instrument. And now I could record. And it's recorded the audio and the MIDI simultaneously. So there's one of the great things in Cubase 13 that you could now, just as you go to add an audio track, in previous versions we'd have to send it to a group, the output of the group to the input of the audio channel. But now we could just set the instrument track as the actual audio input directly. So let me know if that makes sense for you, Tommy C. All right, so we see Soren just says, thanks, Greg, about the feedback and the phones. So let me know if that solves a problem for you. You're seeing discussions of people like adding a like an ADAT light pipe input into Mark Rabin's SSL2 Plus or the HS6 Zoom. So yeah, I don't think either of those have optical inputs, but I think that there is a new SSL interface that has optical ins. All right, so we see Mark Rabin just says the only word besides hello is gratitude for his CubaseIndex.com. And we see Michael Teams has granted Jan 1 gallon of key lime pie ice cream. All right, so we have a question. I feel like this has been asked previously, but I do not seem to find an answer. Is there a way to add plugins via generic remote as a command? So there isn't necessarily a way to, we could add effects channels, we could go to insert slots, but not necessarily specify the particular plugin that is added to the insert. So if you wanted to say, okay, I want to add, this track preset, I don't think that you could specify a specific track preset. You could add a track preset and type in, but I don't know of a way to automatically say, load this compressor on this channel by hitting this button. So because everyone could be different depending on all your third-party plugins. So. Okay. All right, so we see Daniela Tocan just looking for people from Rhine-Main or Cologne area. And they're doing a project with a Fairlight. All right. Okay, reading through comments. See Mark Rabin also giving kudos to Jazz Dude for all his work, helping people out. All right, we see that Michael Teams has granted my family and myself 1 gallon of rum raisin crunch ice cream. Sounds good. Thank you so much. See, Michael Teams is giving a big woof to Stella. All right. See, nice comment from Jazz Dude. Says, do good and get good back. So it's a good life motto. Okay, Michael Teams wants people to whack the like button so I can be gainfully employed. All right, Dean Williams says, hi Greg, monitoring audio/vocals in headphones via UR22 interface recently has a significant delay, so I can no longer monitor. Any ideas what I can check? Cubase Pro 13, Windows 11 used to work fine. So a lot of times when we are, as plugins are added into a particular project, and plugins could be inserts on your control room if you have like a room correction software, something like Sonar or headphone matching software, that and as we have plugins on a particular track, so we could, all the latency of plugins can get compounded. So one of the things that you could try is just make sure, if you go to the lower left hand corner of the transport, there's a function called constrain delay compensation. So when this is turned on, this will bypass plugins that cause a lot of latency. So if you're tracking with a plugin such as, I'll just pop over here, let's just take a look. There is a latency. So when we come over here, we could actually see kind of latency. So if we go to inserts, and let's say we go to the vocal chain, and we're using our vocal chain as our insert, so realize that when we put a vocal chain on and we put a plugin such as our multiband compressor, that we could actually see in the particular, there's a latency monitor that can show you the channel latency of the particular plugin. So if we click here, we can see, okay, the vocal chain is 236 milliseconds latency, and the multiband compressor is 123. So now when we do this, we're almost a half second. We're 0.36 seconds, 0.37 seconds of latency on the particular system. So if we want to track, we want to make sure that plugins that have a lot of latency while you're tracking, some of these plugins are intended more for the mixing stage of the project. But if I come over here and activate constrained delay compensation, that plugins that are high in latency will be bypassed. So it's probably, if the buffer size is set where it's like, you're looking at it and go, okay, that seems pretty low buffer wise. When we do this, it's like, okay, that seems fine. It's like, 7-8 milliseconds. It's not bad, but all of a sudden it jumped up. It's probably that there are plugins that are turned on that are imposing the latency. So often we could think of it, this latency when you play back is automatically compensated for. But during the recording process, it's just physics, as the audio is processed, it's going to cause that latency. So, just, consider using the constrained delay compensation, and that will probably solve the problem for you. You won't hear those plugins, but those plugins won't be causing the latency during your tracking process. So let me know if that helps, Dean. All right, so we have, I think it's Zane saying hi. Thanks for being on the live stream today. All right, and we have Pro Wash DFW from Texas. All right, and we have the artist known as Love from New York saying hello to everyone. And he agrees with Michael Teams that everyone should whack the like button. All right. All right, so Gerald Ely asks, Greg, you showed how to do a print track. What's the use of a print track? So sometimes people will take a print track just to have like a mix down within the particular project. What I often do for like a print track, if you don't want to do a print track, is when I do an export audio mix down. So sometimes people will want the particular, people use a print track to free up system resources. People use a print track so that when their project has not only the raw individual files, but can also have the mix down file. So a lot of times what I do for a project is I will set my left and right locators, and another way of accomplishing kind of the same thing as a print track would be just to do an export audio mix down. I'll do my stereo mix, and I'm going to just come here and say create audio track. So it's export audio, and now what it's going to do is it's going to take my whole mix down, and it's going to now put that into an audio file on my system. And now at this point we could choose to have, our project. So anytime I go to this project, I could just have my mix down file directly in the project, so I don't have to have it in a separate folder. That could be disassociated with the project. Sometimes it could go into, you could have it go directly into a mix down folder. You could have it, so this way when you open up the project, you could have kind of the complete mix down directly inside of the project, just for kind of housekeeping purposes. But some people use that to, render effects, use a print track just to kind of have the, resulting file as a part of the project as well. All right, so you see Miha Vasil just saying hello to myself and Jazz Dude. Thanks for being on. All right, so we see why Cubase never go on sale, even on Black Friday. So there are Cubase sales. So there was one in, wasn't there one in September? So Black Friday was like 3 weeks after Cubase 13 was released. So it'd probably be, I could see customers would be upset if they, bought a new version of Cubase 13 and then it was suddenly discounted for Black Friday. So, generally you see a lot of companies that don't necessarily do promotions on brand new software titles. But there are different promotions throughout the year. So just, pay attention, and there will be different promotions. All right, so Mark Rabin says, Stella says woof, and to hit the like button. So if Mark's dog, Stella, is saying hit the like button, I would do it. All right, so we see Blackbird Officials asks, hey Greg, how can I assign a keyboard shortcut, for example, K, to playback from initial position again? All right, so it could depend on Cubase 12 and earlier. There was a preference under transport that would be listed as return to start position on stop. So you could hit K to trigger that preference if you wanted to. In Cubase 13, that was moved to a more obvious position where we now have start modes. So we could say, okay, I want this to return to start position on stop. So if I wanted that to immediately, let's say as we're playing, I wanted to activate that mode, I would just go to my key commands and we'll say return to start. Just type in the function. So we say return to start position on stop, and then if you want it to be whatever keyboard shortcut you want, assign that, and then that would be all you would have to do to activate that mode. So just kind of, again, it's going to be under the transport But you could just, in the key commands, you could just type into function, return to start position on stop, activate, hit the key you want it to be, and make sure that key isn't assigned to something else as well. But that way you could just have that key to activate that particular function for you, to activate that transport mode. All right, so let me just, sorry, my chat field jumped on me. Okay, so we see from, I think it's from Quellen. Can you say me why I lose headroom in dB by putting a low cut by using the pre-gain section of the frequency EQ? All right, so just revert this. All right, so let's say we have our frequency EQ. Okay, so why I lose headroom in dB by putting a low cut. So I don't think you would. All right, so let's go ahead and open up like supervision here. So we could watch the monitor, so we'll get our inserts. All right, so let's say let's check my audio connections here quickly, sorry. All right, let's try a different project here real quick, see if we can get audio out. All right, so let's say we're here. All right, so I'm gonna put just all Alright, so let's open up Supervision here quickly. Okay, so I'm going to just read this. So why do I lose headroom in dB by putting on a low cut using the pre-gain section of the frequency EQ? All right, so let's say you're here and we want to put on, okay, so let's say we want to cut, let's say 96 dB. We just go to the right, and just make sure. So I'm not sure if it's the frequency EQ. So if we're, cutting particular frequencies, we can see that overall. But when you say the pre-gain, I wonder if it's the channel. So let's say if we're here and we have the pre-gain and we if we're doing it on the particular track, so let's just do it on the master. So when I come here and activate the pre-gain, that will obviously adjust the EQ as we're cutting frequencies out. But let me know if it's like the channel EQ or within frequency EQ. So, I'm not sure if when you lose headroom, if the levels are increasing, or if you're gaining more headroom because the levels are going down. If you could maybe specify that, Quellen, would be helpful. All right, so we have Club Debris checking in from Rio, Brazil. Thanks for joining us. All right, we see Mark Rabin is getting ready for the cold weather. And he's going to do some prep work. All right. So Corey Levine asks, when using Groove Agent 5 on Cubase 13, can the names of the different instruments, snares, kicks, claps from those kits be displayed in the key editor? Thanks, using Windows 10. So not in the key editor. The key editor is going to show the actual names, but they can within the drum editor. So if we open up, let's say, a Groove Agent kit here, we'll right click because we have something called drum maps. So the drum maps don't necessarily carry over to, so let's say I want to come over here to Urban Situation Kit, and we'll have, different, different sounds here. So as we listen to these, all right, so now if we want to see this, I go to my Groove Agent Kit. We could say drum map, and we'll say create drum map from instrument. Once we've done that, now that we have an event, we could double click, open up the drum editor, and now you could see all of the sounds from the particular drums. Just automatically load it. And the names are automatically extracted from Groove Agent, so that you can see it. So it's not going to show up in a key editor, but these will show up in a drum editor for you. So let me know if that makes sense, Corey. All right, always great to see Brian Sawyer Sr. Apologizing for being late. No worries. Yeah, we did start without you though, so. But you're welcome on the bus anytime, and we're just happy you made it, and Happy New Year. All right. All right, Yovan asks, hi Greg, I'm working on a project that involves files recorded at 48 kilohertz. I would like to convert them to 44.1K without altering the temporal position or pitch of the sound. All right, so I'll show you kind of the exact opposite, but the same methodology will work. We'll go to this project here. It's pretty easy to do. All right, so just to get kind of, this is at 44.1, and I'm going to change it to 48K. And so I'm doing just kind of the exact opposite, but again, the same process will work. So just to get a bearing on the pitch and key and tempo. So I can go to my project menu to project setup, or hit Shift plus the letter S. And then we see the sample rate. I'm going to change it to 48K, hit OK. It says, do you want to convert audio to the new rate? We'll say yes. Do you want to keep the source files in the pool directory? We'll say we'll keep them. If you have stuff in musical mode, you may get a message saying, do you want to convert, we'll have to write the files from musical mode. You can say yes. And so we converted the files. Now it says, do you want to keep the audio events at their sample positions? Choose no. So now we can see that my files are at 48K. We'll play the project. You'll hear it's the same tempo and the same pitch. So again, go to your project menu to project setup. Come right over here to the sample rate, change that, and the very last one where you want to keep files at their sample position, choose no, but you can choose yes to all of the other events, and that will convert the sample rate for you. All right, so we see from Got Yours, says on Cubase Pro 13, I noticed I can't use my mouse scroll wheel on the mixing board like I used to. I would hover over send or a low pass filter and quickly scroll wheel up and down to change. Is this hopefully something a preference, or is it a bug in the system? If I use my controllers, they work, but I miss being able to use the scroll wheel for quick small changes. All right, so it is a preference. So come over to Preferences, I think it's under Editing, Project and Mix Console, and you'll see Scrolling, Disable Mouse Wheel for Parameter Change. Uncheck that, and now when we come over to a particular track, we can adjust our sends. So a lot of people would complain in previous generations that they accidentally would move parameters like when they were scrolling up and down. So let's say if I come here to my inserts and we added, let's say, our sends, and then we wanted to scroll up and down it now, we could just restore that functionality. So go to Preferences, to Editing, to Project and Mix Console, and you can uncheck scrolling mouse wheel for parameter change. All right, so we see Corey Levine says he's looking forward to really learn more about Groove Agent. There's a lot to it, and he's really enjoying learning about it. So. All right, so we see, is it possible when I add a track named bass, it automatically opens with a yellow color, and another track for piano opens with a red color, and so on for drum tracks in blue, etc. So I think if we save them as track presets, so let's come over here And I'm just going to add an audio track. So let's say, okay, I'm going to call this bass. And I want this particular track here to be yellow. Okay, so and let's see if we save this as a track preset, if the color is saved with the track preset. Okay, so we'll just come over here, right click, save track preset. Okay, I'm going to go to new project. All right, so we'll add track using track preset. Or I'll just drag it over from. So the color isn't there, but what you can do is, let's say, okay, I want to add so I'll call these drums. Okay, so if I want to come over, you could set up a project logical editor preset for this. And I know people that have this set up, and then we'll create a macro. So we could say, okay, I want to say we want to transform tracks. So I want to transform tracks, we'll say media type is equal, or container type is equal to track. And we'll say name contains bass. And we'll say, okay, so we're going to transform tracks name bass, or to contain the name bass, or we want to set color. Set it to a fixed color here. So say, okay, I want it to be yellow. And now when we hit apply, all right, oh, not bass W, but bass, sorry. Now we hit apply, we could change the color. So let's say I want to change tracks named drums. And I want to set those to blue. So now all these tracks that contain the word drum or drums will be recolored. So what people will do is make a preset for different scenarios. Each of these presets can be saved as project logical editor presets. And then if you go to make a macro, so go to your key commands, you could load up your project logical editor preset, and then once you have all the tracks, you could trigger that macro and all the colors will change accordingly. So you could have it set up like that, or you could start off with it in a template is another way of doing it. Okay. Okay, so you see I missed one of Soren's second questions. So it says his second question is, sorry about that. What can cause Groove Agent SE browser tab to malfunction? Not show the kits installed. I have to click the browser tab, instruments, and then back to kits, then kits show. Okay, so let's take a look. See if I can recreate it. So we'll come over, let's go to Groove Agent. Okay, and then we'll open up the browser. All right, so I'm going to go to, let's say, so I can see all my kits here. Make sure that, you don't have any, if you just come over here, make sure that you have the filters not set. But it looks like everything just kind of pops up. I'll just so he says you have to kind of click over instruments here and then kits, but mine just kind of showed up. I'll just add a new instance of Groove Agent. We'll see if we get the same behaviors, a brand new instance. Let's pop over to the browser, and make sure that. So it seems like everything is. As soon as I come here, we can say all agents. Then all of my kits are just populated without having to select another tab. But maybe it's a filter that's set, maybe even like down here, and you can't see the filter, so maybe try resetting the filter. But it seems like that filter may be restored when just kind of clicking, but it seems to work as expected on my end. Let me know if I'm doing something different. I'm sorry I missed the question. All right, so we see what is the best way to widen a vocal track in Cubase? All right, so there's a couple of different ways of doing this. So, there's obviously different effects processing. So let's say we'll jump back to this. And one of the cool things you can do in Cubase 13 is just to actually take your vocal track, and you could choose. So let's say, like right now, and let me just revert since I've destroyed the project here. So let's say I just want to. All right, so say I'll take the reverb off here so we're like completely dry. So I'm going to convert it to a stereo track, and then even if I wanted to go to like the vocal chain, you could come over. So you go to the imager plugin. And let's add a little reverb. Select our reverb and we'll send it. So again, if we bypass this, the way I looked at you, I fell right through, and we listen to that in context. So kind of very narrow, and then just kind of using some of the vocal chain. And we can say let's make it stereo. So very kind of mono and wider. So play around if you have like the vocal chain, but just putting like there's an imager which is kind of frequency based as well as standalone plugins, or just kind of running them, delays and reverbs. Those can really kind of widen out your vocal. One other plugin that you could utilize also is as we're. Let's say if we come over here, I think it's under modulation. You wished it all away, and I'm left here. Here's the one I'm thinking of. Cloner. So if you wanted to kind of take, this will do subtle panning and pitch bend.
Where do I
So like between those plugins,
I'm uninvited.
so you can use like cloner, and that will kind of
Thought I would be the very last one to leave. I planned loving you forever. Didn't you see? Way I looked at you, I fell right through. Had to do it all for you.
so you can play around with some of those plugins, and that could probably get you there pretty quickly. All right, wonderful to see Tim Weinheimer from Mission Viejo. Glad you can make it today. All right, so we have a question. Do you have an idea if it's possible to make it possible in the future for plug-in key command? So I guess, and in software, anything is possible. I'll definitely kind of pass it along as a feature request. It says it's been highly requested from Cubase 9. So there's a lot of people just kind of use track presets to kind of get a number of plugins, but I'll pass it along again. All right, so we see John Barry just says, "Hi Greg, I'm a big fan of the ARPs in Cubase, but should some of the tech sequences come with a copyright infringement warning? They are pretty close to some known tunes. Cheers. Try tech sequence number 8. All right, so let's say I'll just check it out. So let's go over here. If you're not familiar with these, they're all sorts of fun to kind of build tracks on, but a lot of times people will kind of utilize the same tools, and but I'm not sure if you could really copyright an arpeggio, but different kind of recognition algorithms. So let's say we come here, let's go to the MIDI insert. Just let's see if I can find the preset. And just let me see, maybe if it's in Apache SX. Tech sequence number 8. Let's see. Let's try it. So yeah, there's I think if anyone I don't think it'd be really viable. So I know I always have to be really careful on YouTube videos of what music I use. That's why I kind of use the same projects. I know that they're all kind of good and won't cause issues. But one time I did a video kind of showing a sampled bass where I had an E, or I just played different single bass notes like E1 and F1, F sharp 1. And then YouTube tried to send me a copyright strike on that. I was like, well, it's just a single note. You can't really copyright that. So I kind of disputed it, and they're like, oh, okay, But I don't think there's anything that would actually stand up with an arpeggio. All right, so we see another question. Does turning EQ bands on and off in the mixer or in plugins affect CPU latency? I don't think so. I mean, we could see, so let's go ahead and open up just an instance. We'll come over here to like an audio track. So let's go to audio 7. We'll go to, let's say, our inserts. We'll open up frequency. I think it's usually the plugin, you know, when it's activated, it doesn't necessarily affect. So like here we can see frequencies not turning on, you know, so let's say if I turn on all the bands, we don't have any, but let's try it with since we know the multi-band compressor has a lot of latency when not in live mode. So we'll say, let's get to our multi-band compressor. We can see that our latency is 123 milliseconds, but when I take bands off or on, that this won't. So let's just come here. So we can see, put it in live mode. Let's come over. So we bypass bands. You don't see the latency adjust. So it's usually once the plugin is turned on, then that, you know, the latency is just for the plugin turned on, not what functions are necessarily caused by the, you know, the functions within the plugin that may affect CPU performance, but I don't think it will affect latency on it. All right, so a question: can Halion Sonic 7 import sysx files from the Yamaha TX81Z like the Halion 7? So if it depends on the instrument that you're using. So if we have the FM7, the FM7 doesn't come with Halion Sonic; it's sold separately, but it is included within Halion. So if we go here, we go to Halion Sonic. So since I have a license of FM7, so when we come to, just jump back. All right, so we get to FM here. We will choose, let's say, FM7. So now that I have FM7 open, and you know, we go to the import that this instrument interprets the sysx data from the older Yamaha FM synths. So, you know, that's what is utilizing this. So you could run it in Halion Sonic or run it into Halion inside of FM Lab, but you need to have a license of FM Lab, which isn't standard with Halion Sonic. But if you have FM Lab, then that will transfer the sysx data into it because it's doing it from within the particular instrument. All right, wonderful to see Val from a frozen Vienna. So we hope you're staying warm. And wonderful to see you on. All right, sorry, my chat field just jumped. Okay. All right, so we see question: I'm using this Steinberg Yamaha UR22. Should I invest in an external preamp to enhance vocal recording quality, or is the built-in preamp sufficient for achieving professional sound quality? Yeah, so the you know, definitely the mic pre's on the UR22, the D pre's kind of really hit well above their price point. So I, you know, if your vocal doesn't sound good with that, it's not the mic preamp's fault. You know, but those are really, you know, Yamaha, I believe, I think Yamaha makes more mic preamps than anyone else in the world as a company, and Yamaha manufactures the UR22, so they're able to bring kind of the quality and cost ratio much lower than other companies. So it's a wonderful sounding mic pre. I've been using D-Pre's for 16 years now, personally, and haven't really felt the need to explore other mic pre options. Okay, John Costigan's imaginary dog Giancarlo says to hit the like button. So I think John got the imaginary dog as a Christmas gift. All right. All right, so we see influential Gurning. A vocal synthesizer would be a useful addition to be able to create basic replication of a singer. This will help in building example tracks for real singers to learn. So, Yamaha does have some technology called Vocaloid. So that's something that you could explore. It doesn't come with Cubase, but there is kind of unique Cubase integration with it. All right, so we see I was trying to import an MP4 with the M4V extension. Does Cubase support that format? So, different, MP4, there could be different containers and codecs. So sometimes, if you change it to .mp4, that would do the work, but you could also look for like video support in Cubase Nuendo. And so if you go to this article here, you could see, unfortunately videos aren't like a standard WAV file. So you have to kind of match the particular codecs and containers. So if you just do a search, so you might have to use a utility to get it into the container of .mp4, .avi, .move. And with these particular codecs, so you could find out all the codecs that are supported there. But sometimes, some .m4v could be done from like a cell phone and it doesn't have like a steady frame rate. So stuff like that may not import where it needs to have like a particular frame rate, a known frame rate that's constant. But you could convert it to a video format, Shane, that will load into Cubase. All right, so we see, hello, will Steinberg be coming out with a new dedicated controller for Cubase? I haven't heard of any plans from Yamaha for new controllers. I often, I'll be meeting with some of them at the upcoming NAMM show this month. But I think one of the directions that Steinberg has taken is with the new MIDI remote is to be able to take anything that transmits MIDI and give it a very integrated, user-defined integration, like very highly integrated functionality, that anything that will transmit MIDI messages, whether it's a $20,000 control surface or a nano control, you could get extremely flexible and deep integration with Cubase. So it's not necessarily the control surface, but the whole MIDI remote paradigm has really, been used so that anything that transmits MIDI works really well. But I haven't heard of, there's been no announcements for new Steinberg controllers, but you could always ask Yamaha as well. So. All right, so we see, should the Steinberg team completely overhaul the audio engine code to eliminate audio dropouts? So you could think of it two ways. One is sometimes when you turn a plugin on while audio is playing back, that audio plays out of time until the audio stop and the buffer catches up. Or the audio could pause while the plugin is added so that when it returns that the plugin is playing back in time. So, I think, I don't think it's necessarily so that's kind of what's going on. So it's not necessarily that everything has to be rewritten. It's just kind of maybe a philosophical thing of they don't want the audio playing out of phase and out of time when a plugin is instantiated just to make the transition sound better. So that's, I think, what's going on. So I'm not sure if the audio engine has to be completely rewritten for that. All right. All right, so we see John Barry says, "Cheers, Greg. I hit yes to sample position. Now I know." So let's put the with the sample rate conversion. All right, so we have the Thedon or the Don just saying, "Hey guys, well, thanks for joining us." All right, so, and the Don asks, Cubase 5, we had to choose by setting, list all VSTs by brand, automatic listing just by one click. Why is this option on new Cubase versions not more available? So it's available, it's just you have to know where to turn it on, just like in the previous version. So if we go to your VST plugin manager, at this point, I think we could just come here, and so let's say we go to, let's say, our VST instruments, that we could, I think if we just find so right here, you'll see like the little drop down that you could choose by vendor or by category. So, Cubase 5 didn't have this option where you go to the VST plugin manager to make your own, organize your own plugin collections. So right there, you could just choose sort by category or sort by vendor. So I think it's 2 mouse clicks to get there. All right, so you see Got just saying, thanks about the scroll mouse, working like a charm now. Really enjoyed the new Cubase 13 Pro. All right. All right, so we see how to perform horizontal scrolling in the project window using the MIDI remote and my master keyboard. All right, so let's see if we could get this going. So if you don't know, you could always just shift key and use your mouse scroll wheel to do that, but let's see if we could. All right, so let's say I want to take this. Might be under. See if it's maybe under navigation. Let's look under transport maybe. If it's under there. Alright, so that moves the I know it could be done in other controllers. I know that the Nuage would do it. Let's see if it's... I think if we just do forward, that moves the playhead, but not the scroll. I'll play around with it to see if it could be done with the MIDI remote. I'm not sure. I'll have to look up the name, but I know you can just shift and use the mouse scroll wheel to do it. But I'll see if I could figure out a way to do it in the MIDI remote for horizontal scrolling. Sorry about that. All right, so we see from Soren that he'll try to reinstall Groove Agent SE to resolve the issue with the little browser tab. All right, John Barry asks a question. Quite often I'll have 2 or 3 CPR files in a project folder. Example, radio edit and 12-inch. When backing up, you can only use. Is there a workaround? If no, feature request, please. All right, so let's say if you're doing so 2 or 3 CPR files in a project folder. So what I tend to do in those scenarios, John, is do track versions. So let's say if I was doing different edits, and let's say even, okay, I want to do like a TV mix, I want to do, an extended mix, I would just kind of come over, let me just open up project here. So instead of having 3 projects, I'll just come here, let's just find one. All right. All right, so let's say I was doing, project here, instead of having multiple projects. So let's say, all right, so I would select, all of my tracks here in the project. So we'll just say, select all of our particular tracks. Okay, so now at this point, these are all selected. I want to do, let's say I'll just start off with duplicate version. Okay, and this version, I want to not have any of the lead vocals. So we'll call this, okay, so I delete these events. I'm going to select all of my tracks, and I'm going to just rename this version. We'll just say, okay, it's going to be TV mix. Okay, so now I have my TV mix. All my settings, everything is exactly the same. I want to, now that all of the tracks are selected, I can say let's just jump back to version 1. And now I want this to be more of, let's just grab our range tool, and I need to have a mix without the guitar solo. So I want to take the guitar solo range, and we could globally select that. We'll get rid of the guitar solo. So let me just get rid, I'll just quickly come here. So I'll select again the guitar solo. Okay. And I'm going to select the range here and while holding down Control or Shift, and I want to take that time and let's cut the time. So I could now just come right over here to edit to range, and I want to cut the time. Okay, so now this we are going to, let's say before I do this, we will go back to our track versions and say let's duplicate this version, and we'll say rename no, we'll call it no solo. All right, so select the solo, and now we come over and we'll just say, okay, go to arrange and cut time. Okay, let's come over to, we'll jump back. So again, I could just say, okay, let's go back to our first one, and here I want it to be, we'll duplicate the version and we'll rename it, and we'll call this extended mix. All right, and with this I want to, repeat this section multiple times. And then, instead of having 3 separate projects, I could just say, okay, here's this. Oh, you want the TV mix? I don't have to load up a different project. Oh, you want without the solo? You want the extended version? And this way everything is still within one particular project folder for you. So, think of working maybe that way as well. And I think, once you kind of start working with a lot of different, track versions, that you could have multiple versions very quickly of different arrangements. And then you have one particular project instead of 3 separate projects. So let me know if that makes sense, John. All right, so always wonderful to see Captenergy music on. Glad you can make it. He's from outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. All right, so we see when selecting a MIDI part with the key command right left arrow, can the piano roll update to the selected part instead of I have to double click the part again to show it in the piano roll? All right, so let's take a look. right, so let's say I have multiple events here. So let's say we will go to the editor. So one of the things that you can do is, so let's say if we have the editor, so if we go to the preferences and under editing, there's this function that's auto select events under cursor. So let's say as we're playing, so let's say we're here. So I have this track selected. Right now when the cursor goes over the next event, we'll see that is automatically selected. So let's say if we come here, and when this part starts, it's automatically going to update. Now if we select the particular track, and I think we hit Control or Command E, that we could choose to see, you know, all parts on the active track as well. So, you know, let me just take that preference off. So if I want to come in, we'll just hit Command E here. So now we can see all of the events that are on the particular track, like when we're in a standalone, if you're in the own editor. So, but you could also just come over here and let me just switch to preference. I think we could see that. I'll just switch it to all right, so if I'm here on this particular track, well, still opened it, but you know, but you could also now, like as you go, sorry, it's annoying. All right. So as soon as you come over here, there are settings so you can see all parts on the active track, and you may have, when you look at some events, so as you do this, you can see that all of the events on the track can be visible as well. So check this little drop down menu here. You can say all events on the active track. Okay. All right, so you see from Terry Gray, great to see you on. What's the difference between Arpeggi and Arpeggi SX? So the main difference is, you know, Arpeggi was the original one that came. It's a very simple and effective arpeggiator. Arpeggi SX came later, so it kind of expanded the features. And one of the important things that Arpeggi SX does is you could actually just drag and drop MIDI events and use that as the basis for the arpeggiator. So, you know, so this will have some more, you know, it will have a one-shot mode, but, you know, the big difference is actually just the ability of taking your own sequences into Arpeggi SX and using that as the basis for the arpeggiator. All right. So you see John Barry just mentioned, and we showed this on a previous live stream, that the Razor plugin will increase latency when using the aggressive mode. Yeah, so some plugins, when they switch algorithms, will do that, but most EQs, when you kind of turn on and off bands, don't necessarily increase the latency. But that's kind of, but yeah, I guess some of them would. So. All right, so a question. Greg, do you know if there's a preset in Cubase for plugins to not land on top of an existing plugin window upon adding a new one? So if it is like a plugin, all right, so let me just come here and let's say if we had like multiple insert plugins. All right, so let's say if we come here, so let's say now I open up and let's say we add a plugin and we have this like in the center. When we go to add a plugin, all right, so it could go on top, but I think it's really where the last plugin choice was. So let's say if we go again to here and we open up black valves, I think it tries to, so let's say, okay, I want my bit crusher to be here, that it will retain the positioning. So let's say I want this as my plugin positioning, but it will try to make each of the plugins visible by default. So let's say now we have no plugins open. Now their plugin position will be retained, but depending on what windows in the background are open, it is a preference that when you go to your preferences here to, I think under plugins, that you could say, keep plugin editors are set to always on top. So depending on that setting, that can make a difference as well on the behavior, because it may just immediately go to be on top of other plugins. So there's a couple preferences that could help you with that. So we see from Soren, Greg, is it possible to report some kind of stability problems with a plugin to Steinberg? Maybe it should be on the block list. It's the VST check done by C13 Perfect. So sometimes plugins, Cubase will do like a quick integrity check, but sometimes, depending upon the scenario and the functions of plugins, that those plugins can cause issues when they're, processing audio in a very particular manner. So sometimes, the quick test that Steinberg does on startup to see if it gets into the block list may not encounter every single plugin. If it did that, then if it did like a real extensive test, people would be upset that it took a while to do when they booted up, and that perhaps their favorite plugins that they rely on have failed to test. So it's always kind of a balance, but we try to catch ones that are obviously bad. But if you have a bad plugin, instead of, if you know a plugin that's kind of acting up, probably the best way to get it solved is to let the plugin developer of the plugin that's causing issues, to let them know, because we can't necessarily fix their plugins, and we don't want to necessarily have every plugin go into the block list by default. We want plugins to work, and I think that's the best solution, is to try to get the plugin issues resolved by the plugin developer. All right, so you see his question, sent to Jazz Dude, says, does Thunderbolt 4.3 and Apollo Twin work seamlessly with my laptop i9 and Windows 11? So sometimes there could be issues on, it could be inconsistent results with Thunderbolt on Windows platform. So if so be aware of that Thunderbolt isn't as kind of universally adapted on the Windows platform. All right, so we have a question. How can you keep the DSP meter visible? So one thing you could do is always have the DSP meter in the transport. So if you just kind of right click over here, so if you go to your sections, here you can see input output activity. You could also hit F12. So let's go to your studio. So we'll see our audio performance meter. So you hit F12, and then you could always just click here and right click on the top and keep it to always on top. And then as you open up different windows and different plugins, this could always kind of be set to always on top, but you could see it often if you just kind of come over here to your input output meters, like while you're playing, you can see your CPU meter here. As I've now destroyed my song, but you can see the CPU meters here on the transport as well. But you could just keep that particular window open all the time. All right, so we see Terry Gray recommends the Media ER Toolkit. It's a great video file conversion. So I think a lot of people also, I think Handbrake is another one that people use. All right, so we see John Costigan says, it says, hello, Greg. I have over 10,000 patches for my DX7, but they're in a farm of opcode files, which isn't importable, I think. Is there a workaround other than setting up my old Mac Pluses? So, yeah, so I think that, it's probably with the Galaxy Editor Librarian. I believe that all that is really doing is just saving the sysx. So you might, if you have the files, it could be that, that Galaxy was just reading the sysx data. So, check to see what format the files are in. But you may have to, I don't remember if I never had Galaxy try to get it to work at one point, but never really had that successfully working. And I don't remember if it was just reading the sysx data or if it was a proprietary thing, but it was a good chance that it might be just reading the sysx data. So, or that it extracted all the patches from a sysx dump. All right, so we see just a point on the Apollo Twin says, I heard that the USB version of Apollo Twin has higher latency, especially in low frequencies. That's why I'm considering getting a Thunderbolt version. So, generally you're not going to have any difference in frequencies. The low frequencies or high frequencies aren't going to add any additional latency. But, the plugin, the hardware driver manufacturers should be able to get, similar. It may be 2 milliseconds on Thunderbolt versus 6 on USB. So I think that the differences in latency will be pretty negligible. But if you could have, if you want to get a UAD Apollo Thunderbolt, I would just make sure that you have a particular chipset that they guarantee will work for you. And then go from there. And make sure that they're running it on Windows and ask them which model they're running it on. All right, so we see the Pentagon Audio Manufacturer says, hi, Greg, still working, still listening. Boss says hi. All right, glad that you get to do the live streams while you work. All right, so we see Bernadette Denton Daly says, love the channel here in Republic of Ireland. Thanks for joining us. All right, we see Michael Teams are granted a gallon of chocolate ice cream. All right, so we see from Yazian, is it possible to do AI vocal cover in Cubase 13 with data like WAV files? Thank you, Greg. So I don't know, the only thing I know that can kind of generate like an artificial voice is, effectively there may be some other tools, but the first one it did this, it was popular, is called Vocaloid from Yamaha. So you could check that out. And there you could kind of, play a MIDI melody and type in notes, and we'll kind of use like, different pheromones or, kind of the different consonant and vowel sounds to come up with, with a virtual vocal. So, but I'm not sure if it'll work like chord pads. All right. All right, so we see, Greg, is there a way to use the range marker to select and move whole region when the track list is separated? I can only select either in the upper or in the lower part, but never both. So if you have like a divided track list like I have here, where you can see my chord track and markers, and then my tracks here. So, really all you have to do is just come over. If you go to your project menu, turn off divide track list, and then you can say, okay, I want to use my range tool and I want to cut. And then when you come back, you just go to your project menu and say, divide track list. And now everything, what was there before is, it still goes back into the same order, but you could just temporarily turn off the divide track list, make your range edit, and then turn it back on. And then that way it'll work globally. But there's a lot of times that people may want to keep those two very separate for good reasons. All right, so we see still Hallian 1 sounds are included in Hallian Sonic. Is there a way tip script of loading Hallian Sonic on a track created with Hallian 1 and automatically get the assigned preset in spite of doing it manually help? So if you know what the preset name is, so a lot of times when you work with presets, so depending how, if you have like the track name, so let's say if I come over here to Hallian Sonic, and I say, okay, let's go to so say we'll go to preset. Here we see all the add-ons, but so I think that all the sounds are still kind of there, but if we go to, let's say we go to Hallian Sonic, and then let's say if we go to like our basic sounds here, so I think, let's see if these will. So sometimes you may get, I think you might have to manually do it, and realize that is 15, 16 years ago. So some of the patches, But a lot of people, would just take the particular sounds and, label the sounds right there. But I think you're going to have to manually do it. But if you have a project with Halion 1, I'd be happy to take a look at it. I don't think I have any projects from Halion 1 that haven't been converted over time, but if you have a particular project, if you want to share it to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, I'd be happy to take a look at it. All right, always great to see Tiago from Brazil. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we see Warwalker says, I'm mixing drum tracks with significant cymbal bleed. I want to use a trick where you copy the track invert phase, add a compressor essentially as a gate, but what's the fastest stock compressor in Cubase? So I think that even like the new, let's pop over here, like the new Black Valve I think is really fast. So let's take a quick look. We'll pop over here too. I think also just even the stock compressor is quite fast. And also if you have just, so here you could have the attack go down to a tenth of a millisecond. So that's pretty fast for that. So try those. You could also probably use if you have Spectral Layers Pro, you could take the original tracks that have the cymbals and filter those out of your other tracks if you wanted to as well. All right, so we see Daniela Tocan is back. All right. Okay. All right, so we see question, generic remote versus MIDI remote. What are the big differences, in any? So, the MIDI remote is kind of more of a contemporary approach to it. So the MIDI remote, what the design is that we could take different control surfaces and have them connected directly. So when I have my nano control, I could just plug it in and it's automatically recognized. So that's really good. So, and instead of having to create, software and functions, we wanted to be able to take the particular functions and have it automatically, much easier to assign. So I could come to let's say I want this button to be play. I could come here, I could push this button, I could right click with the MIDI remote, I could say pick up from MIDI remote mapping, and then hit the button for the function and apply the mapping, and that's assigned that fast. So once we have kind of the different setups for your MIDI remote, once you kind of build a replica of what the knobs and faders and buttons are on your remote, you could have multiple pages. So on my nano control, I could just flip between all these different scenarios I want. So if I wanted to control the mixer, or I wanted to control this, so we could have multiple MIDI remotes, and it's much easier to assign these particular functions to automatically work. So we could have your layout of controls, and we could assign those particular layouts, and we could have multiple MIDI remotes functioning in your program as well. So you're going to have your Nectar controller, you want to jump back to the Nano control, or whatever you want that you have available. You can, as long as it transmits MIDI, we can set up the knobs and buttons and quickly assign those things in a very dynamic way. The generic MIDI remote, when you look at it, it could be daunting for people because what you have to do is set up your input and output bus. You have to come up, and a lot of people would miss that we had all of these particular functions here, and we could have fader 4 selected here, but fader 1 ties into this particular function. But if you had fader 1 and fader 4 selected, we could have kind of a disconnect. So conceptually, people would often miss that, fader 1, fader 2, fader 1 at the top is the incoming MIDI message that controls fader 1 at the bottom. So there are a couple of things that we do with the generic remote that we can't do necessarily in the MIDI remote. And the MIDI remote just came in version 12, and it's kind of always growing and evolving. One of the things that we could do is send, we could use loopbacks to do LFOs for functions in programs here. We could also just turn on one other difference in the generic remote that's not available in the MIDI remote currently is where we could say, I want to turn on and off, insert 7 or insert 13. So those are two things that are in the generic remote. I would say it's harder to assign, just a user interface of coming over here and finding all your functions and sub functions. So it's harder to assign these. A lot of people have set up these systems to be very dialed in with like a touch screen, like a tablet controller, to have that all dialed in. And once you do it, you could access, thousands of different functions. But I think the way forward is going to be kind of the MIDI remote, and that will evolve to eventually entirely replace the generic remote over time. But we don't want to do that as people are transitioning over to the newer system. All right, so we see about the plug-in windows, says I know to retain a position removing them. However, I would love if you did not have to move them to begin with. Well, sometimes, I would see sometimes people have 14 windows set to always on top, and eventually something has to be on top and cover something else. So that gets to be kind of, one of the issues with that as well. So. All right, so you see John Barry says new Cubase Ptech type EQ is 0 latency compared to 2 milliseconds with the Waves one. So, all right, so we see question. Hi, Greg. What is synth channel, and why is it not possible to edit using track control settings? So I'm not sure where synth channel is. So usually when you go to the track control settings, so we'll go over here. Let's go to track controls. Let's see if there's a synth in here. So I don't see. You see the chord pads folders, MIDI sampler instrument. But let me know if this is the area when you say the track control settings. I don't. Okay, so and you see a clarification now. Says you can see the synth channel in the mix console, fader, color, and subtracks of a VST instrument. All right, so let me just do a new project here so we don't have to confuse it with an existing one. Okay, so we have our Hallian Sonic here. We'll go ahead and just load up a couple of sounds. Okay, so let's go to the mix console here. All right, so you can see synth channel in the mix console, fader, color, with the subtracks of a VST instrument. All right, so let me just come over here and I'll just set some more outputs. All right, so now we have additional outputs here. Okay, so we see our slot 1, slot 2, and let me just see if it's in the preferences where this is. So synth channel. All right, so let's say I want to move it more violet color. So apply that and hit OK. So we can see that. So this is the actual output here, but when we have multiple outputs for VST instruments, the additional outputs, so we have the main VST instrument, and these are like outputs 2 and 3 that we added. So now that we look at it and we open up the instrument, so outputs 2 and 3, this is the main output that goes with the instrument track. But now when we come over, we could say, let's get to the mix console, that the fader colors for 2 and 3, kind of the synth, like the instrument channels, that those can be differentiated from the main primary output of the VST instrument right here. So let me know if that makes sense. All right, so we see from Jovan Ben says, hello, Greg. Why do you look so cool? I don't think I look cool at all. So, and probably my wife and son would agree with me. So maybe I sound cool. I don't know. But I usually don't really, you know, I never want to actually put my image with, I just want to always show the software to me. But thanks for the compliment. All right. Okay, so we see from John Koskian, thanks for Greg for the DX7 tip. The files are from the Opco editor librarian, but I bet dollars to donuts they're sysx dump. Thanks for the invaluable cry for help. So you're welcome, and thanks for the kind words. All right, so we see John Barry asks, hi Greg, I have some third-party plugins. Some of them can do this trick where a plugin editor is limited to one version and it gets linked with selected tracks, similar to the channel edit window, TBC. Yeah, you know, some, so I guess if we had like 4 tracks and each of these tracks had a particular insert. So let's say if we come here, let me just so we have an auto pan on each one. So let's say if we have this open, so I guess you'd want to, if we have this set for, and we select this particular channel that we should see the insert for that channel. So I could see where that could be interesting, but I think also you could, there is a way to open up all of the insert effects. So I think if you want to do that, you could, while it's not automatic by selecting the track, I think that if you go to the project logical editor that you could open up let me see, but there is kind of a way, let me just see. But there is a logical editor preset, and I think I showed it maybe on a previous live stream, where you could open up all the inserts, but it's not kind of automatically. So, but it, so you know, maybe there are some third-party plugins that do that. But if you could let me know which ones, John, just out of curiosity, that would be great. If you want to email me or just mention it in a comment. All right, so we see question, am I understanding correctly that if I'm using the MIDI remote, I'm not missing any function, not using the generic remote? So two things I mentioned, just to bring it up again. I think the generic remote, you could say open insert 3, open insert 1 with a command on the selected track. And also you could send MIDI like modulation data from a plugin like the Auto LFO MIDI plugin through a MIDI loopback to modulate plugins on parameters. And I think those are really the only two. There might be one or two other really minor things, but those are the two aspects that come to my mind that are available in the generic remote that don't have a direct correlation or translation into excuse me, into the MIDI remote. I just see, oh, ignore that. So you see John Barry, just a further clarification on the opening VST. Is it standard within the VST standard, or is it selected option by the programmer outside the VST standard? Cheers, it's quite a useful feature that I like. I'm not sure if it's in the VST standard. I know like we could select functions, like if we had inside of Hallian Sonic and I added 2 MIDI tracks that I think this is within. So let's say if I'm here in Hallian Sonic and we have this open and I could see like right here. So let's say if I go to edit, that now if I select channel 2 and this is set, let's say to MIDI channel 2, and let's say this is set to MIDI channel 3, that now when I select my different areas here, it doesn't open up the plugin window, but it can automatically show you the current select. It will change the selection in Hallian Sonic and will change the edit screen just like that between the two. So let me know if it's something like that or if it's like an insert plugin that's automatically updated, John. But so I know that this is within the VST spec, but I'm not sure opening up the closing and opening the channel is within the VST spec, but I'm not a developer on that. right. Okay, so Warwalker wants everyone to hit the like button. Okay, let me just scroll up, seeing kind of just okay. Sorry, my chat field jumped on me. All right. Okay. Okay, so we see says, "Hi Greg, I have a question. My question for today's live stream is how to fix clicks in vocals. Does Cubase have something to do so on its own?" So depending on a vocal file, so if you have like a click or a pop, you may see something like as you zoom in. So a lot of times, it could be. So if the click is actually in the vocal, if we just kind of zoom in, let's say we go to, let's say our definition tab. So as soon as we scroll in, so a lot of times you may see like a click or a pop, but if you grab the pencil tool, you may just see something kind of like along those lines. But what you could do is if you zoom in down to near the sample level, you could just grab the pencil tool and kind of draw it in. But see if it's in the audio waveform or it's processing going on. Maybe the plugin is, there's a plugin on it that's causing the click or pop or anomaly or raising the buffer size. But if you see it in the file, you can just often zoom in and just come over here and just be able to kind of draw in or out the pops or clicks within the sample editor. And you may get a little message like, if you're not zoomed in enough, you go to your pencil tool and you try to draw, you may get a little message, please zoom in to a lower resolution. So now at particular resolutions, you could use the draw tool for that. All right. Okay, so we have a question. I have a question: how to capture music from Instagram in Cubase 13 Pro. I used a MacBook Pro. So a lot of times, what there's some utilities that will allow you to kind of route the audio out of one device into another device. What a lot of people do is, just simply, if you could take the video, I know for YouTube, there are like little extraction tools where you could type in the address and it'll give you like an MP3 file of the YouTube video. So you could do that. A lot of people will just take the audio out from a built-in interface, route the Instagram audio of that, and take a wire connected to your audio interface and just record it as audio. So it's not necessarily a limitation of Cubase, but one audio interface talking to the other in computer operating systems. Okay, so Jason Carnes asks, I'm having difficulty setting up a Rolly block to work with Hallian. Am I missing something? So I'm not sure if you're trying to do the like the note expression where you kind of move like, left to right and vertically to change the sounds. If that's the case, I'm not sure if the blocks do that, but if we go to your studio setup, so if you're trying to set it up to do like MPE style functions, you want to just go to your studio setup under studio menu and you'll see devices, and then you could see note expression. And you want to choose your MIDI device that's doing MPE style functions. And here you could set your XY your different MIDI messages for, for different axes. So if you want to do horizontal or vertical, or, aftertouch for pressure, you can have that set up right there. So let me know if that's kind of what you want to do. All right, so we see Michael Pierce just popping in to say hi and to slap the like button. We hope you're doing well, and you see they have a busy week. Thanks for joining us for even just a moment. So we see War Walker asks, one more question. Using VST Connect with a friend, once we have a certain part down, example, a keys line, if we want to track a guitar next, is it best to use the same performer track to record on? So what I would do is just add a track, and then once we come over here, so let's say we go to our VST Connect SE, we come here, we have this going on. So let's say you've recorded on your system. All right, so all you have to do is just add an audio track, and then all you have to do now is just come over here and just choose the VST Connect as the input, and then just record onto a different track. So I would always record onto a different track and just use the same VST Connect as the audio input. All right, so we see it says, can you edit controls like record, monitor, read, write, etc. of a synth channel? I asked above about. All right, so I think that, okay, so when we go to, let's say, our MIDI monitor, we go to our mix console, and we go over here, so we see this. So I think that this would be the same as instrument tracks. So let's come over here and just take a quick look. So when we go to our instrument track, so I'm going to open and expose those by clicking on the instrument that has multiple outputs, and we will come to our track control settings. And so let's say we want to go, I think, to instrument. So let's say I don't want to see read and write enable. So I will remove those and hit apply and okay. So let's just come over here. Let's take a look, see. So now that we are right here, we don't see the, so let's go to our track controls again. So say we want to remove, let's say the so let's say we want, so it looks like their lock is in there, so let's add it. Yeah, so it doesn't look like the instrument track is working with that, because we see the read-write automation, but let me just, so it's like the return channels, but when we click on those, we don't see track controls. So it doesn't look like maybe you can edit those. I'll play around with it if you want to send me an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de. So I'll play around with that some more. So sorry about that. It seems like you should be able to. All right, so we see Terry Gray is recommending Audio Hijack for pulling in internet audio. Okay. All right, so we see John Barry says he has, I guess maybe the mode he was talking about with the plugin is for the clarity meter. So. All right, so we see Jason Carnes had asked about the Roy Block, says not trying to polyphonic thing, just trying to get it to work as basic MIDI. So, see if, like any MIDI control, as soon as you hit it, you'll see it indicated here. See if you see it as a, as an input. So if you get all of your MIDI input ports, make sure that it's visible here as well. So it could be maybe that it's set to all MIDI inputs. And if we go to your studio menu, to studio setup, that you select your MIDI port setup, that particular controller is not set for in all MIDI input ports. So see if it's, if it's not showing up here in the list of inputs, then it's not being recognized by the computer operating system. All right, so we see from Jim Griffiths asked, do you know if there's any way streaming Cubase audio directly to a Bluetooth speaker, or perhaps an output sent to Windows routed to software to monitor and play via Bluetooth? So I know people that will take the headphone out of their audio interface and connect that to a device you get on Amazon for like $15 that will take a headphone out and send that to transmit the audio out of Bluetooth. So there's lots of people that do that. It's often used for it's primarily used for like the back of an airplane seat. So if you have Bluetooth headphones and you can only get into the airplane entertainment system with a 1/8" mini jack, that you plug this in and then that transmits Bluetooth out of the headphone out directly to Bluetooth headphones. So you could use something like that if you wanted to. So it's an inexpensive piece of hardware. All right, I'm going to jump over to questions that were mailed in. Thank you all for the wonderful questions. And again, if you've learned something new, make sure that you do hit the like button and that you, hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't done that. So let's go ahead and look. All right, so we had a question. I need to be able to change guitar sounds in a high tempo song. So what I would be able to like to do is that with a single key press or a foot pedal press. I could have 2 audio tracks with different insert effects. How could I achieve a very quick switchover in live performance or recording, please? Okay, so let's jump over here. I think I have this kind of set up. All right, so we have 2 different files here, 2 different tracks. One is any guitar, one is fat metal guitar. And we want to set up a particular keyboard shortcut to, to switch between these or use a MIDI foot controller, especially if you're doing this for live use. So I created just a quick Project Logical Editor preset. And we said, okay, once we have this set up, we're going to select track. So we're going to say for our function, we're going to set select, and we want to say container type is equal to track, and the track name is equal to any guitar 1. So let's say that's track 1. And now I want this to go to select tracks like fat metal guitar. So basically the same thing, and we're going to say name is equal to fat metal guitar. Save it as a preset. So now when I come over to my MIDI remote, and we could have any MIDI message through MIDI remote or generic, we could say, okay, when I go to my untitled page, that now this will go to this particular button I hit. We'll go to our key commands to process project logical editor. And you could even just kind of say, okay, we want to select so we'll say CCLS, and we'll say select, tracks any guitar. So I'm going to assign that to this, and then when I go to this one, this is going to switch to logical editor for fat metal guitar. So now if I need to switch back and forth, you could have a MIDI, like a MIDI foot pedal, and just switch between those two different tracks using the generic remote with their different plug-in interfaces, plug-in chains, and EQs and volume levels. So you could just do that, or you could assign those process project logical editor presets to key commands if you wanted to. So that's how you could do it. Okay. All right, so we had this question kind of last week. It says I have an external MIDI device which I'm accessing through the VST rack instrument on the right of Cubase. I then have to create a MIDI file to play the instrument. When I tried to render the recording, it was grayed out. Is there something I could do to fix this? Thank you so much. In the live stream, you said you might be able to attach a Yamaha keyboard or send me a video illustrating this. All right, so I actually just created a little part here. All right, let me just see if I jump back to, let me revert this because I have it kind of set up. All right, so I dug out my old Kawai K12 out of the closet here. So, and what I've done is we set this up as an external instrument. So we go to my audio connections to external instruments, and I have my K12. I set my return bus here directly. We'll say to input 1 and input 2. Okay, so I have that set up. And when doing this, I made a MIDI device manager to set my K1 is now going into this particular MIDI port. We could open a device. It's playing on particular MIDI channels. So what I've done now is I just record it. So I'm playing from my MIDI controller. It's now accessing the sounds in my K1. All right, so this is my external instrument. So what I'm going to do now is I'll just go ahead and record some data here. All right, and I'll just take it off of the loop. Sorry about that. All right. All right, so now this is MIDI data. It's being sent out of the MIDI port into my external instrument. The wires, the audio outs from the external instrument are connected into my audio interface. But so now when I play, I could EQ it. I could add my own effects, etc. But now let's go ahead and just render it in place. So we'll come over, let's go to my edit menu, choose render in place. I have just the event selected and render. It's going to do it in real time. And if I don't have it muted, so let me do that again, and I will not have the track record enabled. All right, and now we listen to it, and now it's been rendered in place. So you could just, so it seems to kind of work as expected. I may have, we'll just check my audio connections here real quick, make sure. But I probably just need to have both channels, my audio interface up, but that's how you could render an external instrument to audio. So it seems to kind of work as expected on my end. I think that was sent from David. All right, so we have another question. I created a template with 75 tracks of Steinberg BBS Orchestra. When I try to open it, the bar comes up and then finally freezes. If I open a blank project and then open it up, it'll finally open, but it takes 10 minutes, sometimes more. I have a fairly new computer with 64 gigabytes of RAM. Any ideas? Again, many thanks. So I'm not sure if it's the Steinberg, if it's Iconica, but if it's, maybe it's the BBC Orchestra. I think that's a Spitfire library, so I'm not sure if it's that. But, you know, check to see how you're loading up the instrument. So if you are loading up like one instance of a player with like 16 instruments or 32 instruments, that could really overwhelm your CPU, because once you load up one particular instrument, a lot of instruments aren't set up to be multi-core savvy. So if you load up one instrument with 16 sounds, that is only utilizing one CPU core, and that could bring your whole computer to a crawl. So check your template and see if, you know, if it's using a Hallian based instrument, you could tell it to utilize more CPU cores, but you might have to just split each sound into its own player. But if it's inside a Hallian as the playback engine, if you go to options, you can just click right here and enable multi-core, and then that way you could allocate the CPU cores. But if you have multiple instruments in one single instrument, like this is all my winds, this is all my brass, realize that all of that is only going to utilize one CPU core in most instruments. All right, and we touched on this earlier, but I'll show it again. Is it possible to create a macro that selects every other event? So I did kind of a joint macro and logical editor preset. So the macro I made is, we'll just come over here to key commands and we'll just say mute every other event. So I'm just going to run this multiple times. So it's pretty easy to do once you do that. So now every other event is muted. And why I chose to mute it was because once the event is in a state of being muted, I could go to the project logical editor and I could take the muted events, and let me just come over here. And we'll say select every other muted event. So now what I'm going to do is to select every event that is muted, and then we're going, so we select every event that is muted, and at this point we want to unmute those events, and we're going to invert the selection. So now when I come here, we can see that now that all of those events on that particular track are, at this point, every other one is selected. All right, next question. Hi, Greg. I don't use pre-roll. It's disabled in menu, but when I start transport playback, Cubase begins at negative time in negative PPQ position. It's only a few milliseconds, 180 milliseconds. Other DAWs don't do this and start directly at 0. This must be something similar as pre-roll. I don't know what its name is. What is it, and where can I find and configure / disable it? Can you help, please? So I wonder if it's a particular plugin that needs to look ahead. Some plugins may be set up where it needs a certain amount of time. So some plugins that are processing more real-time audio, may need to actually roll back to have that audio kind of be captured in enough time for that plugin to start. So I think I haven't, if it's physically moving back, I think that could be caused by a plugin, or maybe a plugin that like a real-time plugin that could cause that. So if you have like a real-time, an external effects processor or an external instrument, that the delay of that whole path may cause it to kind of jump back so that it's playing back in time. So I would see if it does it with every project, or if it's projects with a particular plugin, and see if the plugin is what's causing that to jump back so that plugin plays at the correct state starting right on the downbeat, or if you're using external effects or instruments, that could also cause that. All right. So you see, I have a couple other questions for your next live stream. There's no way to save undos in a project, right? Let's say you've been working on a project for a few hours. The undo history would be pretty big. When you close Cubase, all those undos will be wiped, which means you've committed to everything you've done before closing Cubase. Wouldn't it be a great feature to have the option to keep a number of undos in the undo history, so you'd still have the same option as you had before closing Cubase? I think at a certain point, people would, be upset that their projects just kind of keep growing and growing in size. So, it'd be great if I could, go back and change something on my Atari computer that I wrote in college. But at a practical point, I think, some of the different aspects when we're dealing with audio processing, we could do that because we're processing and keeping an original file. But some of the undos could be so contingent upon others. So I think that, what you could do is, just do a save new version every time that you want it to jump into something that will automatically just add a number at the end that's incremented so that you could jump back if needed. But, at some point you have to, make a decision and say, we have to release, all of the undo history at some point, because, people may not realize that, you may do 40,000 steps in a project, and you need to go back really and be able to undo everything, and what the consequences of a linear undo history are. Think of it like going back in time, like, Back to the Future, the consequences of changing this, and, it didn't, we changed this, but this doesn't exist when this thing happened. So I know it would be great, but I think practically it could be tricky. All right, so another question. Bounce only has one option, replace the file. Wouldn't it be great to have the option to bounce to a new track? I've seen that option in other DAWs. Makes a lot of sense. So that's exactly what the render in place does. So if we come, just like what we saw here, but let's say if I have a Hallian Sonic instrument, we'll open up one here. We'll just, all right. All right, so whether it's audio or MIDI, I could just select the particular event, and as we work with this, all I have to do now is, instead of just doing a bounce selection for audio or MIDI, we could just do a render in place. We could go to our render settings. Here we could choose to mute the source events, and we can say render, and then the audio is automatically rendered. The event is still there, it's right below, and the original event we set to mute. We could also, if we had the track selected, remove the original MIDI. So there's lots of different options. So maybe instead of doing the bounce selection, and if I wanted to do this for these events, I could say let's render in place, and I wanted to make these all as one event, and then hit render. And now what it's going to do, if I did it right, let me just... So you could just come over and, render audio in the same manner. So, all right. So you see, I don't know if you want to go into this, but a lot of Cubasers are using Superior Drummer by Tune Track. What's the best way to turn those drums into separate audio files in Cubase? Kick on one audio track, snare on one audio track, and so on. All right. So if we have, let's see if we have like a Groove Agent SE here. All right. So let's say we will. All right, so I'm going to take this particular pattern and drag it over. All right, so what I want to do now is to take each of these sounds. So let's say I'm looking at this pattern. So we say I want the kick to go out of output 1. So once you set the outputs here, I want snare to go out of output 3, my hi-hat out of output 4. So now that I've defined those outputs, all I need to do is select that particular event. And so we see that we have multiple outputs here. So as we play this pattern. And now that this track is going to multiple outputs, we can come over here to project or edit rather, and just do a render in place. So we'll go to our render settings. And now that will, if I don't have my mix down on, but that will separate the multiple outputs. So that you can just simply come right over there and have your different outs automatically rendered as separate files. So once they're routed to different outputs, then at that point, you do a render in place. The kick, snare, and hi-hat will all be in different areas. Okay, so we see, greetings, Greg. I'm starting now to use the comp tool and trying to figure out how to listen to each of my 4 comp tracks individually in the key editor window in Cubase 13. When I'm not in the key editor, I can select each track with the comp tool and there's no problem. However, when I'm in the key editor and double click on the lane that I want to hear and edit, the lane that I double clicked on in the window shows up, but the track that plays back is not the track I'm wanting to hear. It's another one. How can I make the track that I double click on the active track to hear? I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong. Thanks. All right, so let's take a look at an example here. Let's see if I have, all right, so let's see if I have lanes going on in this particular event here. So let's say worst, all right, so I'll just put this on. All right, so if we open up the lanes, we can see that we have a kick, snare, hi-hat. All right, so when I come over here into my editor, so let's go to our large editor. All right, so one of the things that you could do is if we have like the track view here, so we could see tracks, we could turn that on, and then if your track has lanes, you could now just come over and select the various lanes here, and you could just grab like the mute tool, say, okay, I want to hear the kick. And now I want to hear the snare. And I want to hear the hi-hat. And I want to hear the hi-hat and the kick. So you could just come over here and view the lanes in the tracks area of the key editor, and then pick and choose exactly what you want to hear just by using the mute tool. So give that a shot. All right, we have a question. I accidentally added several stereo tracks and the actual track files were mono. Can I easily switch stereo channels into mono? I don't mean converting the files from stereo to mono. So in Cubase 13, this is a big one of the new things that was added. So let's say I wanted to come here. We can see that this is a mono track with stereo. We see this little channel configuration. So we see one circle when it's stereo. If we click on that icon, we can now see two circles. We can now switch back to mono. So now it's a mono track with stereo content. Now it's a stereo track with mono content. If I have just a, so just click right here in Cubase 13, and then you could just go back and forth to change the channel configuration of the particular track. All right, and I think that's all for questions that were mailed in. Let's see if we get one or two more questions in from the chat. Thanks everyone for all the great questions. And again, if you've learned something new, make sure you hit the like button. All right, so we see PS, a built-in Cubase plugin to stream secondary audio to a Bluetooth dongle device would be awesome. Could reference mixes without bouncing down first. So again, like the little piece of hardware would do that, but also realize that when you're doing it, that Bluetooth introduces a lot of latency and can also restrict your sample rates. So, probably hardware is a better solution for that, so that you don't have to change your sample rate inside of Cubase. All right, so as John Barry says, whilst looking for the menu in the old Yamaha EX5R tone module, I found an on-off switch for Polytouch in the MIDI menu. So all you Rolly owners here, have a look at some of the old gear. So I don't think, while there's a lot of instruments like my Roland A80 from 1988 or so has polyphonic aftertouch, it doesn't, like the Rolly stuff allows you to kind of adjust the keys, vertically to change the sound or horizontally as well. So, all right, so we see War Walker says, light bulb on. Thank you, Greg. All right, let's see if we can just one more. All right, so I think with that, we are just about out of time. I want to thank everyone for all the wonderful questions. We will be back on Friday. If you have questions in advance, you could send them to clubcubase@steinberg.de. I appreciate everyone spending part of your Tuesday morning, evening, afternoon learning more about Steinberg products. And we look forward to seeing you more. And, let your friends know that we do this. And, appreciate everyone being a part and making it such a wonderful community. And with that, we will go ahead and wrap up. Everyone, please stay safe and healthy. And we will see you back on Friday at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern. Goodbye.